She's not my real daughter. She's not blood. My mother's will specifically states that her estate goes to blood relatives only, and Emma is not biologically mine. I want her removed from the inheritance immediately. My father's voice was cold and certain as he spoke to the probate lawyer handling my grandmother's estate. We were sitting in a conference room at the law firm, me on one side of the table, my father Richard and his wife Monica and their 2 children on the other side, with the lawyer and his assistant at the head of the table. My grandmother had died 3 weeks earlier, and this was the formal reading of her will, which apparently contained surprises my father was determined to overturn. I sat perfectly still, processing what I'd just heard. My father, the man who'd raised me from birth, who'd been present for every birthday and graduation and major life milestone for 26 years, was now claiming I wasn't his biological daughter. And he was doing it publicly, in front of lawyers and his new family, specifically to cut me out of my grandmother's will. The betrayal was so profound, it almost didn't feel real, like I was watching this happen to someone else rather than experiencing it myself. But before I tell you what happened when we actually did the DNA test, and trust me, the results were so perfectly karmic that I still smile thinking about it. You need to understand how we got to this moment. How my father went from being my dad to being someone willing to publicly disown me for money. How a family can be torn apart by greed, and how sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself in the most devastating and satisfying ways possible. My name is Emma Richardson, and I'm 26 years old. I grew up believing I had a normal, loving family. My father, Richard, my mother, Catherine, who died when I was 19 in a car accident, and my grandmother, Patricia, on my father's side, who was a constant presence in my life until her death last month at 84. My childhood was stable and comfortable. My father was a successful commercial real estate developer. My mother was a teacher, and we lived in a nice suburban house with family dinners and vacations and all the markers of middle-class stability. My grandmother, Patricia, was deeply involved in my life. She'd watch me after school, teach me to bake, take me to museums, tell me stories about our family history. She was, in many ways, my best friend. When my mother died in that car accident 7 years ago, it shattered our family. I was 19 in my sophomore year of college, and I came home to find my father completely devastated. He loved my mother deeply, and losing her broke something in him that never fully healed. For 2 years after Mom's death, it was just my father and me navigating grief together. We grew closer during that time, bonding over shared loss, supporting each other through the worst period of our lives, rebuilding some semblance of normalcy. My grandmother Patricia was our anchor during those dark years, the stable presence that kept both of us from falling apart completely. Then my father met Monica. She was 42 to his 53, divorced with no children of her own, working as a marketing executive at a company that did business with my father's firm. They started dating about 3 years after my mother's death, and I was cautiously supportive. I wanted my father to be happy, wanted him to find companionship again, wanted him to have a life beyond grief. But Monica was different than I'd expected. She was polished and professional and perfectly pleasant on the surface, but there was something calculated about her that made me uncomfortable. The way she'd steer conversations away from my mother, the way she'd make subtle comments about my father, moving forward and not living in the past. The way she'd position herself as the solution to all his problems. They married quickly, engaged after 6 months, married 6 months after that. I was 23, just finishing graduate school, and I attended the wedding with mixed feelings. Happy for my father, but uncertain about Monica and what her presence would mean for our family dynamic. My grandmother Patricia had similar reservations. She'd told me privately that she found Monica opportunistic and was concerned about how quickly my father had rushed into this marriage. "Your father is vulnerable," she'd said. "He's still grieving your mother even if he doesn't acknowledge it. I worry that Monica sees opportunity rather than partnership. But he's an adult and it's his choice. We'll just have to be supportive and hope I'm wrong." Grandma wasn't wrong. Within a year of marriage, Monica announced she was pregnant. This was unexpected. She was 43 by then, and she'd previously told my father she didn't want children. But apparently she'd changed her mind, and my father was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a father again. Twins were born, a boy and a girl, Nathan and Sophie, when I was 24. My father was ecstatic. Monica was possessive of her new family unit, and I found myself increasingly excluded from what had once been my family. The shift was subtle at first. Family dinners that didn't include me, holidays where I was invited but made to feel like an outsider, conversations about the kids that clearly meant Nathan and Sophie, not me. My father's attention and energy completely consumed by his new young children and his new wife. I tried to be understanding. New babies are demanding, and my father was older now, probably exhausted by infant twins. But the exclusion felt deliberate rather than circumstantial. Monica would make comments about how much easier it was for my father now, that he had a real family again instead of just dealing with grief, as if I'd been part of the grief burden rather than his daughter. My grandmother Patricia saw what was happening and was furious. She'd confronted my father multiple times about how he was treating me, how Monica was systematically pushing me out of the family, how he was letting it happen. My father would defend Monica, say I was being oversensitive, suggest that maybe I was jealous of his new children. I wasn't jealous. I was hurt and confused about why my father was allowing his new wife to erase me from his life, and why he couldn't see what was happening. Grandma Patricia became even more important to me during this time. She made sure I knew I was loved and valued, and that my place in the family was secure regardless of what Monica was trying to orchestrate. We had lunch together every week. She came to my graduate school graduation when my father claimed he couldn't make it because the twins were sick. She was my anchor when my relationship with my father was deteriorating. Last year, Grandma Patricia was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, terminal, aggressive, unlikely to respond to treatment. She had maybe 6 months, the doctor said, possibly less. She took the news with remarkable grace and spent her remaining time getting her affairs in order and spending time with people she loved. She and I spent hours together during her final months. She told me stories about my mother, about my father when he was young, about our family history. She made me promise I'd build a good life for myself regardless of what happened with my father's new family. She assured me that I was loved, and that I'd always be her granddaughter no matter what Monica tried to claim. She died 5 weeks ago, peacefully at home with hospice care, holding my hand. My father and Monica had visited earlier that day, but had left because the twins were getting restless and bored. I'd stayed. I'd been the one there when she took her last breath. The funeral was well attended. Grandma Patricia had been active in the community, involved in multiple charitable organizations, beloved by many people. My father gave a eulogy about what a wonderful mother she'd been. Monica stood beside him looking appropriately somber. I sat in the front row feeling numb and alone, having lost the person who'd been my truest family. A week after the funeral, we were called to the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. This was when I learned that my grandmother had left me a substantial inheritance, roughly $2.3 million in assets, including property, investments, and her home. There were also specific bequests to various charities, and a trust fund of $500,000 for my father, to be used for his care and comfort in his later years. My father was shocked. He'd apparently expected to inherit the bulk of his mother's estate, with perhaps small amounts set aside for me and charities. Instead, the opposite had happened. I was the primary beneficiary, he got a trust fund, and charities got the rest. Monica's face had gone hard with anger when the terms were read. The lawyer had explained that Mrs. Patricia Richardson had been very clear in her intentions. Her estate should primarily go to her granddaughter Emma, with provisions for her son Richard's comfort, but not outright control of assets. The will had been updated 6 months before her death, when she'd known her prognosis and had time to make careful decisions. "This is outrageous," Monica had said immediately. Patricia was clearly not in her right mind when she made this will. She was sick, probably on medication, definitely not capable of making sound decisions. Mrs. Richardson was evaluated by 2 independent physicians who confirmed her mental competency at the time the will was updated, the lawyer had interrupted smoothly. "This will is legally sound and reflects her clearly stated wishes." My father had been silent during this exchange, his face a mask of shock and calculation. I'd watched him process the information, watched the numbers add up in his head, watched him realize what he'd just lost. We'd left the lawyer's office in tense silence. I'd tried to speak to my father outside, to acknowledge how difficult this must be, to assure him I didn't want this inheritance to damage our relationship. He'd looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, assessing, almost hostile, and said, "We'll be contesting this will. My lawyer will be in touch." That had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of my father's lawyer filing motions, requesting delays, demanding documentation of my grandmother's mental state. 3 weeks of increasingly hostile communications claiming that I'd manipulated my grandmother, that I'd isolated her from her son, that I'd coerced her into changing her will in my favor. None of it was true. My grandmother had been completely lucid until her final days. She'd made her decisions independently, after consulting with her own financial advisors and lawyers. She'd been very clear about why she was leaving most of her estate to me, because I'd been consistently present in her life, because I'd cared for her without expectation of reward, and because she trusted me to use the inheritance wisely, rather than squandering it. But my father and Monica were determined to overturn the will. And they'd been throwing every legal argument they could think of at the probate court, hoping something would stick. Which brought us to today's meeting. The probate court had requested that all parties meet with the estate lawyer to try to mediate the dispute before it went to formal litigation. I'd come hoping we could find some resolution that wouldn't completely destroy what remained of my relationship with my father. Instead, my father had opened the meeting by claiming I wasn't his biological daughter and therefore shouldn't inherit from his mother's estate at all. The room was silent after his declaration. The lawyer looked shocked. Monica looked triumphant. The lawyer's assistant looked uncomfortable. And I sat frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. "I'm sorry," the lawyer said finally. "But are you claiming that Emma is not your biological child? Because that's a very serious allegation. And if you're making it, we'll need documentation to support it." "I'm absolutely claiming that," my father said firmly. "My wife Monica and I have discussed this extensively. We believe Emma is not biologically mine. Her mother Catherine must have had an affair, and Emma is the result of that affair. I've raised her believing she was mine. But now that we're talking about inheritance of my mother's estate, which is meant for blood relatives, the truth needs to come out." I found my voice finally. "You're lying. You know I'm your daughter. You're only saying this because you want to contest Grandma's will, and you think this gives you grounds to cut me out entirely." "We're not lying," Monica interjected, her voice sharp. "We've had suspicions for years. Emma doesn't look anything like Richard. She has none of his features, none of his mannerisms. It's obvious she's not his biological child." This was so absurdly false that I almost laughed. I looked exactly like my father. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same sharp cheekbones, same tall, slim build. Family friends had commented my entire life about how much I resembled him. But Monica was apparently willing to say anything to support this fiction. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Richardson, if you're making this claim, we can arrange for paternity testing. However, I should warn you that if the test proves Emma is your biological child, it will significantly damage your credibility in any further legal challenges to your mother's will. Are you certain you want to proceed with this allegation?" My father looked at Monica. She nodded firmly. He turned back to the lawyer. "Yes, we want paternity testing. And when it proves that Emma is not my biological daughter, we want her removed from my mother's will entirely. Only blood relatives should inherit from family estates." I sat very still, my mind racing. Why was my father so confident about this? Did he actually believe I wasn't his? Had Monica convinced him of some fiction? Or was this just a desperate legal strategy to contest the will, hoping I'd back down rather than go through the humiliation of public paternity testing? "Fine," I said clearly. "Let's do the paternity test. But I want something in writing first." Everyone looked at me. The lawyer raised his eyebrows. "What do you want in writing, Ms. Richardson?" "I want my father and his lawyer to state on the record, in legally binding documentation, that they're claiming I'm not Richard's biological child, and that they want me removed from the inheritance based solely on that claim. I want them to commit to that position before we do the test. Because when the test proves I am his biological daughter, I want it documented that he attempted to deny parentage solely for financial gain." The lawyer actually smiled slightly. That's a very reasonable request. Mr. Richardson, are you willing to have your paternity challenge documented formally before we proceed with testing? My father hesitated, looking again at Monica. She nodded emphatically. Absolutely, my father said. We stand by our claim. Emma is not my biological daughter, and we want that documented before the testing proves us right. The arrogance in his voice was stunning. He was so certain, so confident, so completely convinced that this test would support his claim. Which made me wonder, what had Monica told him? What lies had she fed him to make him this confident about denying his own daughter? Or, and this thought chilled me, did my father know exactly what the test would show, and was he making this claim anyway? Hoping the legal process would be complicated enough that he could delay the inheritance distribution regardless of the results. All right, the lawyer said, pulling out documents. I'll draw up a formal statement of your paternity challenge to be signed by all parties before we proceed with DNA testing. We'll use an accredited lab with chain of custody protocols to ensure the results are legally valid. And I want to be very clear, Mr. Richardson, if this test proves Emma is your biological daughter, this documented attempt to deny parentage for financial gain will be considered by the probate court when evaluating your other challenges to the will. Do you understand? I understand, my father said coldly. Proceed with the documentation. I watched him sign the papers claiming I wasn't his daughter. Watched Monica sign as a witness. Watched the lawyer notarize everything and make copies for everyone present. I signed my acknowledgement of the challenge and my agreement to paternity testing, keeping my expression neutral and professional, even though inside I was shaking with hurt and fury. My father had just legally documented his denial of me as his daughter. Whatever the test results showed, this betrayal was now permanently on record. There was no walking this back, no claiming misunderstanding, no possibility of pretending this hadn't happened. He'd chosen money over me, chosen his new family over his relationship with his daughter, chosen to publicly humiliate and disown me rather than accept his mother's wishes. We scheduled the DNA testing for 3 days later at a certified lab. Chain of custody protocols, multiple samples, legally defensible results. The lawyer explained that results would take approximately 1 week to process, and that once we had results, we'd reconvene to discuss next steps in the probate process. I left that meeting feeling numb and hollow. My father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle at my college graduation ceremony when I received my master's degree, who'd been my only parent since Mom died, had just legally claimed I wasn't his daughter to steal my inheritance. But here's what he didn't know, what Monica didn't know, what none of them had apparently considered in their confidence about this paternity challenge. I had my mother's jewelry box, and in that jewelry box was a note my mother had written to me before she died, meant to be read after both my parents were gone, a note about family secrets and truth, and things I'd need to know about my heritage. I'd read that note 3 days after my grandmother's funeral, when I'd been going through Mom's things and had found it hidden in a false bottom of her jewelry box. And what that note told me gave me a very good idea of what the DNA test was about to reveal. My father thought he was being clever. He thought denying paternity would give him legal grounds to overturn the will. He thought he knew what the test would show. He was about to discover he'd catastrophically miscalculated. And I was going to watch his world implode with the same cold certainty he'd shown when denying I was his daughter. Sometimes karma doesn't need help. Sometimes you just need to let the truth reveal itself and watch arrogant people destroy themselves with their own lies and assumptions. Stay with me, because what that DNA test revealed didn't just determine the inheritance, it detonated a bomb under my father's new family that none of them saw coming. The 3 days between that meeting and the DNA testing appointment felt endless. I kept replaying the scene in my mind. My father's cold certainty, Monica's triumphant expression, the casual cruelty of watching him sign legal documents denying I was his daughter. But I also kept thinking about my mother's letter, the one I'd found in her jewelry box 3 weeks earlier. The letter that had explained so much about my family history and had prepared me for exactly this kind of betrayal. Let me tell you what my mother had written, because it's crucial to understanding what was about to happen. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then both your father and I are gone, and you're going through our things. I've written this letter for you to find when the time is right, when you're old enough to understand complicated family dynamics and secrets that people keep. First, I want you to know that you are loved completely, and that you are absolutely your father's biological daughter. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise, especially if someone tries to use paternity as a weapon against you. But there's something you need to know about your father's marriage to Monica, if he remarries after I'm gone. Your grandmother Patricia shared with me, shortly before I died, that she had concerns about Monica's intentions. Specifically, Patricia told me that Monica had been married before. Twice, actually, and that both marriages ended under suspicious circumstances involving inheritance disputes. Patricia had a private investigator look into Monica's background because she was concerned about your father's vulnerability after my death. What the investigator found was disturbing. Monica has a pattern of targeting wealthy widowers, marrying them quickly, having children with them, and then positioning those children to inherit at the expense of any existing children from previous marriages. She's done this twice before successfully, and your grandmother believed she was attempting to do it again with your father. But here's the crucial part. Emma. Patricia also told me that she'd arranged for genetic testing of the twins after they were born. She did this secretly, using samples from Nathan and Sophie's newborn screening tests, and compared their DNA to your father's DNA that she'd kept from his own medical records. She wanted to know if these children were truly your father's biological children, or if Monica had manipulated the situation somehow. The results showed that Nathan and Sophie are not biologically related to your father. They're not his children, Emma. Monica somehow convinced your father that she was pregnant with his children when she wasn't, or she conceived them through other means and passed them off as his. Your grandmother never told your father about these results because she didn't want to destroy him while he was already vulnerable. But she documented everything and left instructions that if there was ever a paternity challenge or inheritance dispute involving you, this information should be revealed. I'm telling you this now because if you're reading this letter, it probably means someone, likely Monica, is trying to claim you're not your father's biological child to cut you out of inheritance or family. Don't let them. You are your father's child. You're the only grandchild Patricia has who is actually biologically related to her. And if it comes to DNA testing, make sure they test everyone, not just you. The truth will protect you. I love you forever, my beautiful daughter. Don't let anyone make you doubt who you are or where you belong. Mom, I'd read that letter probably 50 times in the 3 weeks since finding it. My mother had died 7 years ago, but she'd still managed to protect me from beyond the grave by documenting the truth and making sure I'd find it when I needed it. My grandmother Patricia had known about Monica's deception. She'd known Nathan and Sophie weren't biologically my father's children. She'd documented it, but had chosen not to tell my father because it would have destroyed him. Instead, she'd protected me by leaving me the inheritance and by documenting the genetic testing results in case they were ever needed. And now they were needed. Because my father, manipulated by Monica, was claiming I wasn't his biological daughter to steal my inheritance, having no idea that he was about to discover his real children weren't biologically his at all. The irony was so perfect, it was almost painful. Monica's entire scheme relied on convincing my father that I was the illegitimate child while Nathan and Sophie were his legitimate biological heirs, but DNA testing was about to prove the exact opposite. I'd brought my mother's letter to my grandmother's estate lawyer the day after the meeting where my father had made his paternity challenge. The lawyer had read it carefully, made copies, and then pulled out sealed documentation from my grandmother's estate files. Your grandmother left specific instructions, the lawyer had told me. If there was ever a paternity challenge involving you, I was to reveal testing that she'd had done on Nathan and Sophie Richardson. These are certified genetic test results from a reputable lab, showing conclusively that those children are not biologically related to your father, Richard Richardson. Your grandmother documented this 3 years ago and sealed it with instructions that it only be opened under specific circumstances. Your father's paternity challenge triggers those circumstances. Can we submit this as evidence? I'd asked. We can, but I'd recommend a different approach, the lawyer had said thoughtfully. Your father has challenged your paternity and committed to that challenge in writing. Let's follow through with testing you and him to prove you are his biological daughter. But then, If they continue to contest the will based on blood relatives only, we can request testing of Nathan and Sophie as well to determine who is actually a blood relative of Patricia Richardson. The results will speak for themselves. Will my father know ahead of time that we're testing his other children? Not until we request it, and by then, we'll already have the results proving you're his biological daughter, which will have significantly damaged his credibility. When we then reveal that Nathan and Sophie aren't his biological children, the impact will be, well, it will be legally decisive. So that was the plan. Prove I was my father's biological daughter, then prove his other children weren't. And watch Monica's entire scheme collapse in the most public, legally documented way possible. The DNA testing appointment was at a certified lab that specialized in legal paternity testing. My father, Monica, and I arrived separately. They came together with their lawyer. I came with my grandmother's estate lawyer. We checked in, provided identification, had our samples collected using swabs and blood draws with full chain of custody documentation. The lab technician explained that results would be ready in 7 to 10 business days, and that the results would be sent directly to all lawyers of record, as well as to each tested party. Monica had insisted on being present for the testing, claiming she wanted to ensure everything was done properly, which really meant she wanted to watch me squirm. Instead, I'd been calm and professional throughout the entire process. My father had looked uncomfortable, perhaps starting to have doubts about what he'd committed to. Monica had been confident and smug. Their lawyer had been businesslike and efficient. "This is going to change everything," Monica had said to me as we were leaving the lab. "When the results prove you're not Richard's daughter, you'll lose everything. The inheritance, your place in the family, any claim to the Richardson name. You should start preparing for that reality." "I'm very comfortable with whatever the DNA results show," I'd replied evenly. "The truth will be what it is. I'm just curious. Are you comfortable with what the truth might reveal?" She'd looked at me sharply, as if trying to determine whether I knew something she didn't, but I'd kept my expression neutral and walked away. Let her wonder, let her be confident. The results would arrive soon enough. Those 7 days of waiting were strange. I went to work at my job as a corporate marketing manager, had dinner with friends, went to the gym, lived my normal life, all while knowing that in a few days, everything was going to explode in ways my father and Monica couldn't possibly anticipate. I'd struggled with how to feel about what was coming. Part of me was angry at my father for being so easily manipulated by Monica, for choosing to believe I wasn't his daughter rather than questioning his new wife's motives. Part of me was sad that our relationship had deteriorated to this point. Part of me was grimly satisfied that his attempt to betray me was about to backfire catastrophically. Mostly, I was just tired. Tired of fighting for a place in my own family, tired of being treated as an obstacle to Monica's plans, tired of watching my father prioritize his new wife's agenda over his relationship with his actual daughter. On day 8 after the testing, the results arrived. All lawyers received them simultaneously via secure email, with hard copies to follow by courier. My grandmother's estate lawyer called me immediately. "Emma, the results are in. As expected, you are conclusively Richard Richardson's biological daughter. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. The results are legally defensible and completely clear. You are his child." I'd been expecting this, but hearing it confirmed still brought tears to my eyes. Not because I'd doubted it. I'd never doubted I was my father's daughter. But because now it was documented, proven, undeniable. My father's attempt to deny me had failed at the most basic level. "What happens now?" I'd asked. "Now we wait for your father's lawyer to acknowledge the results and withdraw the paternity challenge. Then we proceed with probate proceedings for your grandmother's estate. But Emma, I think we should also request DNA testing of Nathan and Sophie Richardson. Your father's legal filing claimed that only biological descendants of Patricia Richardson should inherit from her estate. If we're going by that standard, we need to establish who is actually a biological descendant. Are you ready for what that's going to reveal?" "I'm ready," I'd said firmly. My father wanted to base everything on biology. Let's follow that logic all the way through. The lawyer had drafted a motion that same day. Request for expanded genetic testing to establish biological descendants of deceased. The motion noted that Richard Richardson had challenged Emma Richardson's inheritance based on claims she was not a biological descendant of Patricia Richardson via not being Richard's biological child. The motion stated that those claims had been conclusively disproven by DNA testing. However, since Mr. Richardson had established that biological relationship was the determining factor for inheritance, the estate requested genetic testing of all alleged grandchildren of Patricia Richardson, specifically Nathan and Sophie Richardson, to establish who was actually biologically entitled to claim descendant status. Motion was filed with the probate court that afternoon. My father's lawyer received notice within hours, and according to my lawyer's sources, all hell broke loose in my father's household when they read it. My lawyer received an emergency call from my father's lawyer that evening. The conversation, as relayed to me, went something like this. "This is outrageous. You can't demand DNA testing of minor children without their parents' consent." The children's legal father is Richard Richardson, who established biological relationship as the determining factor for inheritance claims. We're simply following the logic he introduced. If he wants to contest based on biology, we need to establish the biological relationships of all parties claiming descendant status. Those children are Richard's biological offspring. This is a fishing expedition designed to harass my clients. If they're his biological offspring, the testing will confirm that and settle the matter conclusively. If they're not, then based on the standard your client established, they have no claim to inheritance as biological descendants of the deceased. Richard Richardson can consent to the testing, or we can compel it through the court. Either way, the testing is happening. We need time to consider our response. You have 72 hours. After that, we're filing for court-ordered genetic testing based on the precedent your client established by challenging Emma Richardson's biological status. The call had ended there. My lawyer had told me to prepare for several possible outcomes. 1. My father might consent to testing because he genuinely believed Nathan and Sophie were his biological children. 2. My father might refuse testing, which would look extremely suspicious to the court. 3. Monica might convince my father to withdraw all challenges to the will entirely to avoid the testing, though that would require her to give up the inheritance fight. What actually happened was option 1. My father consented to the testing, which meant that either Monica was confident enough in her deception that she thought it would withstand DNA scrutiny, or she'd actually convinced my father so completely that Nathan and Sophie were his biological children that he saw no risk in the testing. Either way, they'd committed. Genetic testing of Nathan and Sophie was scheduled for 5 days later, again at the certified lab, again with full chain of custody protocols and legally defensible procedures. I didn't attend this testing. I wasn't required to be present since I'd already been tested. But my lawyer was there as a representative of the estate, and she reported that my father had looked increasingly uncertain, while Monica had been insistent that, "This is a waste of time and money, but fine. Let's prove once and for all that Nathan and Sophie are Richard's biological children and end this ridiculous challenge." The samples were collected, the testing was processed, and we waited another 7 days for results that were going to destroy my father's world and expose Monica's fraud in the most public, legally documented way possible. During those 7 days, I received several messages from my father. The first was an email. "Emma, the DNA test proved you're my biological daughter. I acknowledge that, but you have to understand. I was confused. Monica had raised doubts. I wasn't thinking clearly. This doesn't need to affect our relationship. We can move past this. Please don't push forward with testing Nathan and Sophie. They're just children. This is between adults. Let's settle the estate like civilized people." I didn't respond. He'd legally documented his denial of me as his daughter, had publicly humiliated me, had tried to steal my inheritance, and now that his first strategy had failed, he wanted to move past it and settle like civilized people? Without accountability, without apology, without acknowledgement of the profound betrayal he'd committed. No, we were doing this by his rules now. Biology determined everything. So let's see what biology actually revealed. The second message came 3 days later, voicemail this time. "Emma, please, I'm asking you as your father. Withdraw the motion for testing Nathan and Sophie. Whatever issues you and I have, the twins don't deserve to be dragged into this. They're innocent children. I'm begging you, don't do this to them. We can work something out with the inheritance. We can figure out an arrangement that works for everyone. Just please stop this genetic testing." His voice had cracked on the word begging, and for a moment I'd almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I'd remembered him coldly signing documents claiming I wasn't his daughter. Remembered Monica's smug confidence. Remembered years of being pushed aside for his new family. No. He'd established the rules. Biology was all that mattered for inheritance. We were just following through on the logic he'd introduced. The third message came the day before the results were due. A text message from Monica herself. "You're going to regret this. Emma, when the results prove Nathan and Sophie are Richard's children, we're going to sue you for the cost of this testing and for harassment. You're a vindictive, jealous woman who can't accept that your father has moved on with his real family. This is going to backfire on you spectacularly." I'd smiled reading that text. Monica's confidence was remarkable. She actually believed her deception was secure enough to withstand DNA testing. Or she was bluffing desperately, hoping I'd back down before the results exposed her. Either way, it was too late now. The results were being processed. The truth was about to emerge whether Monica was ready for it or not. And on day 7 after the twins' testing, my lawyer called with results that were about to detonate everything my father thought he knew about his family. "Emma, the results are in." My lawyer's voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the undercurrent of satisfaction. Nathan and Sophie Richardson are not biologically related to Richard Richardson. Probability of paternity is 0%. They are conclusively not his children. I'd been expecting this. I'd known from my mother's letter what the results would show, but hearing it confirmed was still staggering. My father had spent 3 years raising children he believed were his biological offspring. He'd prioritized them over his relationship with me. He'd reshaped his entire life around these twins, and they weren't genetically related to him at all. "Does my father know yet?" I asked. Results were sent to all parties simultaneously 20 minutes ago. I imagine he's currently reading them and processing what they mean. "Emma, this changes everything. Your father challenged your inheritance based on biological relationship to Patricia Richardson. We've now proven that you are biologically her grandchild, and that Nathan and Sophie are not. By his own logic, you're the only legitimate heir." "What about Monica? Has she responded to the results?" "Not yet, but her position is legally indefensible now. She pushed for biological status to determine inheritance. The biology has determined it, just not in the way she expected. She has no grounds to contest further." "What happens next?" "We have a scheduled meeting at the court tomorrow morning. All parties, both lawyers, the probate judge, will present all genetic testing results, and the judge will make a determination about how to proceed with the estate. Given the evidence, I expect the judge to rule definitively in your favor and close any avenues for further contest. This should be over by tomorrow afternoon." I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat in my apartment, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Victory, certainly. My inheritance was secure and Monica's scheme had been exposed. But also sadness for my father, who'd just learned his real children weren't actually biologically his. And underneath it all, a grim satisfaction that the people who'd tried to manipulate genetics to steal from me had been destroyed by those very same genetics. My phone rang. My father. I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to answer. Finally, I picked up. "Emma." His voice was broken, shattered. "Did you know? Did you know Nathan and Sophie weren't mine?" "I found out 3 weeks ago," I said honestly. Mom left me a letter explaining what Grandma Patricia had discovered. She'd had the twins tested after they were born, because she was suspicious of Monica's intentions. "The results showed they weren't your biological children, but Grandma didn't tell you because she didn't want to hurt you when you were already vulnerable. She documented it, though, in case it was ever needed." "And you knew this when I challenged your paternity? You knew the test would prove you were my daughter, and that if we tested Nathan and Sophie, it would prove they weren't mine? You let me walk into this? You walked into it yourself, Dad. You challenged my paternity. You claimed I wasn't your biological daughter to steal my inheritance. You established that biological relationship was the determining factor. I just let the truth speak for itself. If you'd actually believed I was your daughter, if you'd trusted your own memories and experiences instead of believing Monica's manipulation, none of this would have happened. But the twins, Emma, their children, they don't deserve to find out this way that I'm not their biological father. They're 7 years old, Dad. They don't need to know any of this. That's between you and Monica to figure out. But you can't ask me to feel guilty for letting the truth come out when you're the one who made biology the issue in the first place. Monica lied to me. His voice broke completely. She told me she was pregnant with my children. She convinced me to move forward quickly with the pregnancy. Said she didn't want to wait because of her age. I never questioned it. I never thought, God, Emma, I've spent 3 years raising children who aren't mine while pushing away my actual daughter because Monica convinced me you were the problem. Yes, I said simply. You did. And now you have to live with the consequences of that choice. Dad, you chose to believe I wasn't your daughter rather than questioning Monica's motives. You signed legal documents denying me. You tried to steal my inheritance. And you did all of that while knowing deep down that I was your daughter. Because you were there when I was born. You watched me grow up. You know I look exactly like you. But Monica convinced you to betray your own knowledge of the truth, and you went along with it because it served your financial interests. I was manipulated. You were complicit, I interrupted. Yes, Monica manipulated you, but you chose to believe her manipulation because it benefited you to do so. You wanted that inheritance money. You wanted to believe your new family was more important than your old one. You made choices, Dad. Own them. There was a long silence on the phone. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. What do I do now? That's not my problem to solve, I said, not unkindly but firmly. You need to figure out what to do about Monica and the twins. You need to decide whether to pursue custody of children who aren't biologically yours, but who you've been raising as your own. You need to determine whether your marriage can survive this revelation. Those are your choices to make, but what you don't get to do is ask me to fix this for you or feel guilty for letting the truth come out. Do you hate me? The question caught me off guard. Did I hate him? No, I said after thinking carefully. I don't hate you. I'm deeply hurt and angry about what you tried to do to me. I'm disappointed that you were so easily manipulated by someone with bad intentions. I'm sad that you prioritized money and a new family over your relationship with your actual daughter. But I don't hate you. I just don't trust you anymore. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. I understand. Emma, I'm so sorry. I know those words mean nothing right now, but I need you to know. I'm sorry for all of it. For believing Monica's lies. For challenging your paternity. For trying to take your inheritance. For pushing you away. For failing you as a father. I'm sorry. I hear you, I said. But sorry doesn't undo the damage. Sorry doesn't erase what you tried to do to me. Sorry is just words until there are actions to back them up. And right now, I don't trust that your actions will match your words. What can I do to make this right? I don't know if you can make it right. Show up at the court hearing tomorrow and accept the judge's ruling without further contest. Acknowledge publicly that I am your daughter and your mother's rightful heir. Stop trying to steal from me. And then, maybe years from now after you've done the work of actually changing and becoming trustworthy again, we can talk about rebuilding something. But that's a long way off, Dad. You destroyed a lot of trust in a very short time. We ended the call shortly after. I felt emotionally exhausted but also strangely at peace. I'd said what needed to be said. The truth was out, and tomorrow, the judge would make it official. That night, I received a text message from an unknown number. This is Monica. You think you've won, but you've destroyed a family. Those children love Richard and believe he's their father. When they find out the truth, and they will eventually, it will devastate them. That's on you, Emma. You could have let this go. You could have shared the inheritance. Instead, you've ruined innocent children's lives just to get revenge on me. I hope you're happy. I stared at that message for a long time before responding. Monica, you destroyed this family when you lied to my father about paternity, manipulated him into believing I wasn't his daughter, and tried to steal my inheritance. You created this situation by running your con game on a grieving widower and his family. The children's pain, if they ever experience any, which depends entirely on how you and my father handle it, is the result of your lies, not my truth-telling. I didn't create this mess. I just refused to be victimized by it. The consequences are yours to deal with, not mine. She didn't respond. I blocked the number and went to bed, sleeping better than I had in weeks, knowing that tomorrow would bring closure. The court hearing the next morning was tense and uncomfortable. My father and Monica sat on one side of the courtroom with their lawyer. I sat on the other side with my grandmother's estate lawyer. The probate judge reviewed all the documentation, the original will, the paternity challenges, all the genetic testing results, the legal filings from both sides. This is an unusual case. the judge said finally. Mr. Richardson challenged his daughter's inheritance based on a claim that she was not his biological child, and therefore not a blood descendant of the deceased, Patricia Richardson. DNA testing has conclusively proven that Emma Richardson is Mr. Richardson's biological daughter, and therefore is a blood descendant of the deceased. The challenge to her inheritance based on paternity is without merit and is dismissed. My father nodded, looking down at his hands. Monica's face was a mask of barely contained fury. Furthermore, the judge continued, genetic testing has revealed that the other alleged grandchildren of the deceased, Nathan and Sophie, Richardson, are not biologically related to Mr. Richardson, and therefore are not blood descendants of Patricia Richardson. Given that Mr. Richardson himself established biological relationship as the determining factor for inheritance claims, and given that Emma Richardson is the only proven biological grandchild of the deceased, the court finds that Patricia Richardson's will should be executed as written, with Emma Richardson as the primary beneficiary. The judge looked sternly at my father's lawyer. Any further challenges to this will, based on the biological relationship argument, will be considered frivolous and may result in sanctions. Mrs. Richardson's testamentary wishes were clear. Her mental competency was documented, and all genetic evidence supports her distribution of assets to her biological granddaughter. Do you have any intention to file further challenges? My father's lawyer glanced at my father, who shook his head slightly. No, Your Honor. We withdraw all challenges to the will and acknowledge Emma Richardson as the rightful primary beneficiary. Good. This estate will now proceed to distribution as outlined in the deceased's will. We're adjourned. The judge stood and everyone rose. It was over. Officially, legally, completely over. As we filed out of the courtroom, Monica tried to approach me. My lawyer stepped between us. Mrs. Richardson, you have no business with my client. I suggest you leave her alone. You haven't heard the last of this, Monica hissed at me over my lawyer's shoulder. You might have won in court, but you've made an enemy. I'll make sure Richard never forgives you for exposing this. I'll make sure... Mrs. Richardson, my lawyer said sharply, you're dangerously close to harassment. I suggest you walk away now before I file for a restraining order. My client has won every legal challenge you've thrown at her. Stop making threats you can't back up. Monica stalked away, heels clicking angrily on the courthouse floor. My father lingered, looking like he wanted to say something to me. But ultimately he just nodded once and followed Monica out. I stood in the courthouse hallway feeling relief and sadness and closure. It was over. The inheritance was secure. The truth had been revealed. Monica's scheme had been exposed. My father knew what he'd been manipulated into doing, but I'd also permanently damaged my relationship with my father, possibly beyond repair. And while that was primarily his fault for believing Monica's lies and trying to deny me, it still hurt. He was still my father. And now he was dealing with the revelation that his real children weren't biologically his, while his actual biological child, me, didn't trust him anymore. The next several weeks were anticlimactic compared to the drama of the court case. The estate proceeded to distribution. I received my $2.3 million inheritance as specified in my grandmother's will. Various charities received their bequests. My father received his trust fund. Everything was executed exactly as my grandmother had intended. My father tried to reach out several times, calls, emails, requests to meet for coffee and talk. I didn't respond immediately. I needed space to process everything that had happened and to figure out whether I even wanted a relationship with him going forward. Monica and my father divorced 6 months after the court hearing. According to mutual acquaintances, the marriage had imploded completely after the paternity revelations. My father had learned that Monica had conceived Nathan and Sophie through a sperm donor, had lied throughout the pregnancy about them being his biological children, and had been planning all along to position them as his heirs while pushing me out of the family. The betrayal had destroyed whatever trust remained between them. Custody of Nathan and Sophie was complicated. My father wasn't their biological father, but he'd been raising them as his own for 3 years. The courts ultimately granted him joint custody based on his established parental relationship with the children, though Monica remained their primary guardian. My father continued being dad to the twins because, despite the genetic revelations, he loved them and they loved him. I felt conflicted about that. On one hand, good for my father for choosing to maintain relationships with children he'd bonded with even after learning they weren't biologically his. On the other hand, he'd been willing to deny me as his biological daughter for money, so his willingness to be a non-biological father to Nathan and Sophie felt hypocritical. But that was his journey to navigate, not mine. 8 months after the court hearing, I finally agreed to meet my father for coffee. He'd been consistently reaching out, not pushing too hard, but making it clear he wanted a chance to talk. I'd decided that while I didn't owe him forgiveness, I at least owed myself closure through an actual conversation. What happened at that coffee meeting changed nothing about the inheritance or the past, but it changed something about the possibility of the future. And whether we could ever rebuild what had been broken was going to depend on whether his actions could finally match his words. We met at a quiet coffee shop on a Saturday morning, neutral territory where neither of us had history or memories. My father arrived first, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Hair grayer, face more lined, shoulders slumped in a way that suggested he was carrying weight that bowed him down. He stood when I arrived, uncertain whether to hug me or shake hands or keep distance. I solved the problem by just sitting down across from him, keeping the table as a boundary between us. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't. I'm here because you've been persistent without being pushy, and because I owe myself closure even if I don't owe you forgiveness." "Say what you need to say, Dad." He took a breath, organizing his thoughts. "I've been in therapy since the divorce. Intensive therapy, working through why I was so susceptible to Monica's manipulation, why I was willing to believe things about you that contradicted everything I knew to be true, why I prioritized money and a new family over my relationship with my actual daughter, and I've learned some hard truths about myself, such as I never properly grieved your mother's death." I pushed the grief down, tried to move forward too quickly, tried to build a new life instead of processing the loss of my old one. Monica offered me an escape from grief, a new relationship, new children, a fresh start that didn't require me to feel the pain I was avoiding. And I grabbed onto that escape without questioning her motives or examining whether I was making good decisions. "That explains why you married her quickly," I acknowledged. "But it doesn't explain why you were willing to deny I was your daughter." "You're right. That was something else, something uglier." Monica was very good at identifying my insecurities and leveraging them. She made me doubt myself, doubt my memories, doubt my judgment. She'd say things like, "Are you sure Emma is yours? She doesn't look like you." And I'd say, "Of course she's mine. I was there when she was born." But Monica would plant these seeds. "Catherine traveled a lot for work before Emma was born, right? You were busy building your business. Are you absolutely certain about everything that happened during that time?" I felt anger rising. "So she gaslit you into doubting your own daughter's paternity?" "Yes, and I let her do it because on some level, believing you weren't mine gave me permission to prioritize my new family. If you weren't really my biological daughter, then Nathan and Sophie were my real children, and choosing them over you wasn't betrayal. It was just biology. Monica gave me a narrative that justified treating you badly, and I accepted that narrative because it served my purposes." "And the inheritance? Trying to deny me was really about money?" "Partially. But Emma, it was also about control. Monica wanted to be the mother of my only children, wanted her kids to be my sole heirs, wanted to erase your mother's existence and your place in my life completely. She saw you as competition, for my attention, my money, my family identity. She convinced me that cutting you out of the inheritance was fair, because you weren't really family anyway. And I went along with it because I'm a coward who couldn't face the truth about what I was doing or why I was doing it." I sat with that for a moment. "Do you understand how deeply you hurt me? It wasn't just about the money, Dad. You legally documented your denial of me as your daughter. You looked me in the eye and claimed I wasn't yours. You tried to erase me from our family completely. That's not something I can just get over because you're in therapy now and understand why you did it." "I know. Emma, I know I can't undo what I did. The legal documents exist. The memory of what I said and did exists. The damage is permanent in some ways. I'm not asking you to just get over it or forgive me because I'm sorry. I'm asking for the chance to prove through sustained actions over years, not weeks or months, but years, that I've actually changed, and that I understand the magnitude of what I did to you. What does that actually mean in practice? I asked. What actions are you talking about? It means I'm in therapy indefinitely, working on being a better person and a better father. It means I've set up a trust fund in your name, separate from your grandmother's inheritance, that acknowledges I should have been supporting you financially and emotionally all along. It means I'm available whenever you want to talk or need support, but I'm not pushing or demanding your time. It means I'm being a good father to Nathan and Sophie, even though they're not biologically mine, because that's who I should have been to you all along, regardless of genetics. It means I'm doing the work, Emma, whether or not you ever forgive me or want a relationship with me again. I felt tears forming, despite trying to stay emotionally controlled. Do you even understand what it was like to watch you prioritize children who weren't yours over the child who was yours? To be shoved aside for a new family? To have your own father claim you weren't his daughter in front of lawyers and judges? I understand it was devastating. I understand it was a betrayal that cuts to the core of who you are and what you deserved from me. I understand that I failed you in every possible way a father can fail a child. And Emma, I understand that knowing all of this intellectually doesn't fix the damage emotionally. That's why I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or instant reconciliation. I'm just asking you not to close the door permanently on the possibility that maybe, years from now, after I've proven through consistent actions that I've changed, we might be able to build something new. Not what we had before. That's gone and can't be recovered. But maybe something different that acknowledges the past while trying to do better going forward. Why should I take that risk? I asked. Why should I invest emotional energy in someone who's already proven they'll betray me when it's convenient? You shouldn't, he said immediately. You have every right to cut me off completely and never look back. That's a valid choice that I would deserve. But Emma, I'm asking anyway because you're my daughter, my only biological child as it turns out, and I love you, even though I've done a terrible job showing it. I'm asking because I want the chance to be the father I should have been all along. I'm asking because I'm hoping that maybe the man I'm trying to become is someone you might eventually be willing to have in your life, even in a limited capacity. But if the answer is no, if you need to protect yourself by keeping me at distance forever, I'll respect that choice. This is entirely about what you need, not about what I want. I looked at him carefully, trying to assess whether this was genuine change or just another manipulation, trying to determine whether this apologetic, accountable version of my father was real or just a temporary performance to try to rebuild the relationship he'd destroyed. I need time, I said finally. I need to see whether these promises translate into actual sustained behavior change. I need to process my own feelings about everything that happened. I need to figure out whether I even have the emotional capacity to let you back into my life after what you did. So here's what I'm willing to offer. I'll keep the door open. Not wide open, but not completely closed. You can reach out occasionally, maybe once a month. And if I'm in a place where I can engage, I will. But there are no guarantees, no timeline for when or if I'll be ready to rebuild anything. Can you accept that? Yes, he said without hesitation. Yes, I can accept that. Emma, I'll take whatever you're willing to give, whenever you're willing to give it. And I'll do the work of being better regardless of whether you're watching or responding. You deserve that from me. We talked for another hour, carefully, honestly, with more openness than we'd managed in years. I told him about my career, my life, my plans for the inheritance, investing most of it, donating some to charities my grandmother had cared about, using some to buy a house. He told me about his therapy revelations, his relationship with Nathan and Sophie, his acceptance that Monica had completely manipulated him and that he bore responsibility for falling for that manipulation. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just two people trying to be honest with each other about damage that had been done and possibilities for the future that might or might not materialize. When we left the coffee shop, my father hugged me briefly and whispered, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself and not letting Monica steal what was rightfully yours. Your grandmother would be proud too." Grandma would be proud that I didn't let anyone make me doubt who I was, I corrected. The inheritance was never the point. The point was refusing to be erased or denied. The money is nice, but the victory was standing my ground when people tried to manipulate the truth. You're right, he acknowledged, and that's a lesson I'm still learning. That truth matters more than convenience, that integrity matters more than financial gain. that people matter more than money. You've always known those things. I'm trying to learn them now, late though it is. Over the next 2 years, my father did exactly what he'd promised. He reached out once a month with no expectations, sending brief emails about his life and asking about mine. He was in therapy consistently. He set up the trust fund he'd mentioned. He showed up for Nathan and Sophie even though they weren't biologically his, modeling the kind of committed parenting he should have shown me. And slowly, carefully, I started letting him back in. Not all the way. I don't know if I'll ever trust him completely again. But I answered his emails. I agreed to occasional coffee meetings. I let him meet the man I'd started dating seriously. I attended Nathan and Sophie's birthday party. At my father's house, not Monica's. She and I maintained zero contact, and watched my father be the dad to them that he'd failed to be to me. It hurt, watching that. But it also showed me that he was capable of being a good father when he chose to be, which meant his failures with me had been choices rather than inherent inability. That was both painful and validating. Painful because it meant he could have done better all along. Validating because it meant his recent efforts toward change were possible and potentially sustainable. 3 years after the court case, I used part of my inheritance to buy a beautiful house with a garden my grandmother would have loved. I invited my father to the housewarming party. He came alone. He was dating someone new, but respectfully didn't bring her without checking if I was comfortable with that. He walked through the house, saw photos I'd displayed of my grandmother and my mother, saw the life I'd built with the inheritance they'd ensured I received. "This is beautiful." "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandmother would be so proud of what you've done with her gift. Your mother would be proud of who you've become." "They'd both be proud that I stood up for myself," I replied. "That I didn't let you and Monica erase me or steal what was rightfully mine. That I let the truth speak for itself, instead of backing down from DNA testing. That I protected myself, even when it meant exposing ugly truths about my family. I'm proud of that too," he said quietly. "I'm ashamed that I created circumstances where you had to fight your own father for what should have been freely given. But I'm proud that you were strong enough to fight and win. You're a better person than I deserved as a daughter." It wasn't forgiveness. Even 3 years later, I wasn't ready to say I'd fully forgiven him for denying I was his daughter and trying to steal my inheritance. But it was progress. It was honest acknowledgement of harm done. It was him taking responsibility without making excuses. It was him showing up consistently without expecting immediate absolution. And maybe, years from now, that would be enough to build something that resembled a father-daughter relationship again. Or maybe it wouldn't. Either way, I was okay. I had my inheritance, my independence, my life, my truth. I had the knowledge that when people tried to manipulate genetics to erase me, the actual genetics had proven I was exactly who I'd always known I was. My father's daughter, my grandmother's granddaughter, my mother's child. Monica, meanwhile, disappeared from our lives completely. Last I heard, she'd moved to another state and was dating another wealthy widower. I hope he had better sense than my father did, but honestly, that wasn't my problem to worry about. She'd tried to steal from me and failed. That was enough. The inheritance my grandmother left me wasn't just money, it was validation. Validation that I'd been a good granddaughter who'd shown up and cared for her when she was dying. Validation that my relationship with her had been valuable and real. Validation that I was worthy of being remembered and provided for. My father's attempt to take that away from me by denying my paternity had failed because the truth was on my side. And isn't that the lesson of this whole story? That truth is more powerful than manipulation. That genetics don't lie even when people do. That standing your ground and letting facts speak for themselves is sometimes the best strategy when people try to gaslight you or rewrite history. Father claimed I wasn't his daughter to cut me out of an inheritance. DNA proved I was his only biological child, while his real children weren't biologically related to him at all. Monica's entire scheme collapsed under the weight of scientific evidence. The truth won because truth always has receipts that lies can't forge. If you're watching this and dealing with family members who are trying to manipulate, gaslight, or deny you, stand your ground. Document everything. Trust the facts. Don't let anyone make you doubt what you know to be true, just because it's convenient for them to rewrite history. My grandmother left me an inheritance, but more importantly, She left me documentation of the truth and instructions to use it if anyone ever tried to deny who I was. That was the real gift, not the money, but the validation that I was valued, that I belonged, that I was exactly who I'd always known myself to be. My father learned an expensive lesson, that DNA doesn't lie, that trying to manipulate genetics for financial gain can backfire catastrophically, and that the daughter he tried to deny was stronger than he'd ever given her credit for, and I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's just standing firm while liars trip over their own lies and letting the truth do the heavy lifting. Thanks for watching this story. Drop a comment if you've ever had to stand up to family members who tried to gaslight you or deny reality for their own benefit. How did you handle it? What would you have done differently? And remember, you know who you are. Don't let anyone else's lies or manipulation make you doubt your own truth. Stand your ground, trust the facts, and let reality speak for itself. Subscribe for more stories about standing up to family manipulation, protecting yourself from toxic people, and letting truth win when lies seem more convenient. You're stronger than people who underestimate you realize. And sometimes DNA tests are karma's way of providing receipts that liars can't dispute.